Derek Chauvin's time as a modern-day slave patroller is now officially over. But what about the rest of the slave patrollers in the United States? Check this out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. So let's talk about policing for a minute and continue our other conversations as well. I'll get back to your phone calls in just a few moments here. But there is so much of a celebration right now that a murderous psychopathic cop and perhaps some of his compatriots are going to rot in jail for years and years, perhaps the rest of their lives, that it seems, at least to me, that we're missing some really big questions. Like, why did a police officer's knee end up on a guy's neck for passing a bad $20 bill? Is that really the sort of crime that you go after? I mean, you know, if you know who he is or where he is, you can have a court date. Why? Why was a cop patrolling a neighborhood that was 19 miles away from where he lived? Why don't we have community policing in the United States? How has Ronald Reagan's decision, I believe it's called the 1099 program, although I might be mixing that up with an IRS document, but how did Ronald Reagan's decision, that was really a gift to the defense industry, the military contractors, that every year surplus military equipment would be given to police departments across the country? So, I mean, literally, you can see this on Netflix, right? Go back or Amazon Prime or whatever, you know, however you get your old shows. Go back and look at cop shows pre-Reagan. Louise and I were watching Cagney and Lacey, you know, for a couple of weeks, which it took place in the 80s, but it was before the Reagan stuff really bit. All the police had revolvers, you know, six-shot Smith & Wesson police specials. They didn't have these, you know, big semi-automatic weapons. They didn't show up, you know, they didn't bring a SWAT team to serve a warrant. You go back and watch McMillan and Wife, or, you know, actually any of the police shows, any of the cop shows pre-1985. And, you know, you saw normal cops. Post-1985, what do you see? Basically the military. Reagan militarized our police. Why aren't we having a conversation about that? We had a fellow call in the other day and point out that he was talking about the Stanford, I believe it was Stanford prison experiment, which is where they took a group of college students and put them in an unused prison facility, and had half of them just randomly selected to be guards and half of them as prisoners. And within a few days, a week or so, the guards had just turned into monsters and the prisoners had turned into, you know, passive, beaten down. I mean, they had to cancel the experiment. Why do we hyper-militarize this stuff? How does that help our society? I get it that there are some people who are so broken or even evil that they have to be temporarily or even permanently separated from society. I totally get that. I'm supportive of that. But we have gone way over the edge. Yes, take out the Charlie Mansons of the world. But that's not who the majority of the people in jail are. Why is it that our police treat people who are black in particular, people of color in general, and people in poor communities, even white people in poor communities, why is it that they treat them so differently and with so little respect compared to the way that they treat people in wealthy communities, particularly white people in wealthy communities? And yes, occasionally black people in wealthy communities are treated well, but very often they also get arrested for, Dr. Lewis Gates is a great example. Remember when he got arrested by a cop for trying to open his own front door because it was a big fancy house outside of Washington, D.C., I think it was in Georgetown, and they ended up having lunch with President Obama. I mean, it was like, really? Why is it that 12,000 American citizens have been killed by police since the year 2000 and only 7 or 8 of those police have been charged with murder? Why is it that America has 4%, 4.3 or 4.4% of the world's population, yet we have a quarter of the world's prisoners? Why is it that slavery, literal slavery, is still legal in the United States? The 13th Amendment says that slavery shall be banned except if you're convicted of a crime. It literally provides that exception. Why do we still allow slavery in the United States? And how is that part of that law tied to the fact that our prisons are among the most brutal in the developed world? Our prisons are not places for rehabilitation. If you have an opportunity to watch Michael Moore's movie, Where to Invade Next, there is a piece in that movie, 15, 20 minutes of the movie, where he goes to Norway and he visits one of their top security prisons. And it's like a dormitory. The inmates cook their own food. Yes, they have knives. Because the assumption is they're all going to be reintegrated back into society, or at least the vast majority of them. There are a few who probably won't. People like Anders Breivik, the mass murderer. But they're still treated as if they are humans. There's this underlying assumption of humanity. And that echoes through society. The bottom line is that policing should be about preventing crime as much as catching and punishing criminals. In fact, policing should not be about punishing criminals at all. That's the job of courts and prisons. And yet Donald Trump is out there saying remember when he gave that talk to the Police Chiefs Association, he says, rough them up a little bit. Don't be so nice, and you put them in the cars. Right? That's just wrong. But back to the guy who called in and said, with Reagan's program, when you dress up like you're a ninja warrior, a stormtrooper, you start thinking like one. And it's absolutely true. And police who dress like they're from the Empire in Star Wars don't just resemble an occupying army, they become an occupying army. And that's not the basis of policing. The most powerful tool for policing is the cooperation of the community. That is the single most powerful thing. And that only comes when police are viewed as legitimate representatives and members of the community. The second most powerful tool for policing is when the police officers themselves are held in high personal regard. They're respected by the citizens that they protect and serve. When they're perceived as the good guys, not as the high school bullies or the drunken jocks who grew up and got a job as a cop, which is, sadly all too often the case. Now, none of those are radical positions or even all that controversial. I've told you the story before of, having gone through the Georgia Police Academy, and there was this Secret Service agent there who was one of my instructors, a brilliant guy. And he was just gung-ho on what were called the general instructions. This was issued in 1829 in London by the Metropolitan Police Department to every new officer. And the general instructions basically said, well, here's number one. The purpose of policing is to prevent crime and disorder as an alternative to their repression by military force and the severity of legal punishment. That's number 1 out of 9. Number 2, to recognize always that the power of the police to fulfill their functions and duties is dependent on public approval of their existence, of their actions, and of their behavior, and their ability to secure and maintain public respect. We have abandoned all of this stuff.
This